What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to the HiiKER podcast. I'm your host, Eoin Hamilton. It's been a couple of weeks since the last episode of the podcast, the new video edition of the podcast. It's tricky to keep up. But that's the trials and tribulations of, I suppose, trying to run a podcast while also, wearing many different hats in a startup. Things have been pretty hectic over the last couple of weeks. Both personally and with HiiKER. HiiKER is just continuing to grow as we add more trails, we get more maps on, new users are coming onto the platform. So it's great to see HiiKER grow so well and so fast, and the community around it has just been so supportive. Personally, I was in Tenerife with my partner, with Sharon, for a week, just over a week, a couple of weeks ago, and it was just an amazing experience. If you've never been to Tenerife or the Canary Islands to hike, it's not something that generally comes up. People, especially in Ireland and the UK, they think of Tenerife as a package holiday, a resort that you would have went on, certainly in my generation, in your childhood. So we never turned around from the beach and looked up to the mountains. It was an amazing experience. Got to do some incredible hikes in Anaga, and was lucky enough to summit Teide, which is the highest peak in Spain. It's a volcano. It's actually an active volcano. And word to the wise, when you get to the top, it stinks. There's a lot of sulfur up there, and it does stink, I will say. It doesn't spoil the view, but it certainly catches you off guard. So keep that in mind when you're going to the top. It's also been just a crazy week of traveling around for HiiKER as well. We got the chance to go to New York City last week, and we were pitching to potential investors in the US. We got to meet a lot of different people from the tech and startup and entrepreneur world in New York City, and luckily enough I also got to meet some friends and some other people from the hiking and the outdoor scene while I was over there as well. So it was a really worthwhile trip over, and we can't wait to go over again. So this week on the podcast, I'm joined by Matthew Usherwood. Matthew is the host of the Humans of the Trail podcast. He's also someone who's flown the flag for inclusivity and more diversity in the outdoors and in hiking in the UK for quite a while now. But he's a long-time supporter of the podcast, and I even appeared on his podcast a good while back. So if you're interested in hearing me yarn on about building a certain hiking app, go check that out. It's the Humans of the Trail podcast, and find it wherever you get your podcast from. I really enjoyed this conversation with Matthew. We share a very similar kind of inclusive and diverse outlook on what the outdoors industry could look like in the future, and talk about how we might get there. We also just enjoy, a conversation about life and, being parents and trying to bring a family up in a very uncertain world, and trying to bring them up in the outdoors as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here's my interview with Matthew Usherwood. They've got in jokes. It's like watching, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. You have to know. You have to be watching the show, the joke.
It's so like that, isn't it? From as somebody who listens to it occasionally from this side of the pond, I'm thinking, I don't know what's going on. There's a joke here. I don't get it. Clearly, I've missed that campfire moment where you should. They're totally in jokes, but it's got a really good kind of setup. It's got a good vibe. It's funny. I can see why they're one of the biggest outdoor podcasts really out there at the moment, and that's even from because I look at statistics and things anyway for these podcasts, and I noticed they're usually in the top 20 at least for kind of wilderness, which is our category, podcasts in the UK, which is pretty impressive given that they have almost no geographical relevance for Europe and the UK.
Yeah, well, I guess it's kind of a sign of the rise in popularity of through hiking, or that kind of younger generation of long distance hikers, because yourself, long distance hikers over the years have generally, or I suppose hikers or walkers, have been generally older, and they wouldn't be like sleeping out in a Z-Packs, piece of cling film type tent, and
Yeah.
ultralight was not really a thing. It was just walking a trail over a certain amount of time. Whereas now the through hike kind of generation has come through from the States and is definitely starting to make a lot more of an appearance over here with the likes of, Easy Dexter and Impala and that kind of those kind of guys that have brought that culture over to the UK. And I suppose the pandemic was a big kickoff for that when we had I think Impala was trying to call it like the bubble, the end to end bubble, getting people out hiking that trail, and it worked, a big time like that. The end to end trail was one of the most popular trails in 2021, I believe, if not the most
Yeah.
popular trail in terms of like searches on Google, like not just on
It's
HiiKER, on Google.
it's wild. I mean, the hiking scene, as long as I've been in the outdoor industry, has changed. And the outdoor scene, actually, to put a broader spin on it, has changed massively. I remember when I started sort of getting into outdoorsy things, which was when I was 18, and I'm 34 now. Um, and it was so different back then. Like, I started my um, love of the outdoors of climbing and hiking as well. And kind of bagging Wainwrights was never a thing. I just like, and it wasn't that long ago, really. It's this side of the millennium, but bagging Wainwrights was just not a thing. Instagram on the mount, taking Instagram shots on the mountain was just not a thing. Looking trendy outdoors, like no chance. You looked like a total geek with your slightly baggy waterproof trousers on, even if it was the latest gear. And you kind of ruffled up backpack that had come from what's the brand? I don't know, like your old low alpine backpack and things like that. And none of it looked good, but we were hiking and we looked the same as the Ramblers Association who kind of walked past at the same time, and it just was not a good look. And when you got down to the pub, you put your normal trousers on because you didn't want to look like you'd been hiking. And when I got into climbing as well, even back then, climbers were the most obscure, uncool bunch of people ever. And the whole thing's just changed that. I see hikers on the mountain and they look really fashionable. I'm like, when did hiking become fashionable? Climbers look fashionable, mountain bikers look fashionable. The whole thing has changed. And the whole actually just going out and doing it is an acceptable pastime rather than like, you go hiking. Like, it's just a normal thing to do. It's so strange. And definitely the pandemic has sped that up, but that shift towards outdoor becoming fashionable has been happening for quite some time now. I mean, there's even Gorpcore, which is outdoor inspired fashion. I found out this term about 3 months ago, and I thought, hang on, this is actually a thing where you can go and wear outdoor clothes and it be trendy.
Yeah.
Uh, these like models who wear these outdoor clothes are wearing what I used to wear, and it was never trendy when I used to do it. Why didn't I define fashion? But I love it. Like, I think it's amazing that outdoors has become totally mainstream, but it comes with challenges. But yeah, it was never that in when I was doing it. Back in 2000. I think seven, I think, or six, I started kind of getting into climbing and things. So yeah, it's crazy how it's just blown up over the last kind of 15 years, really.
Yeah, like when we started HiiKER back, it was like 20. It was just before the pandemic.
Mm.
Paul was kind of a one man band on it at the time, the founder, and I kind of was tagging along little bits of it because I wasn't a big hiker at all, but I certainly like we tagged a hiking trip along with a surfing trip. So surfing was my first kind of intro to like outdoor sports, any kind of outdoor sports. And we were like, oh, well, we go for a nice walk in, the west of Ireland, and that then turned into hiking, and then we started getting into longer stuff, and it was still like it was getting more popular. I think apps like All Trails were in like their early embers, and View Ranger was maybe like the first iteration of View Ranger was starting to become a thing, but like it was still very much like a Ramblers Association type kind of a product. People were still just using paper maps and compasses back then, and it was still very uncool. And then we had this idea of like, oh, let's make it cool. And then little did we know that people were already trying to make it cool for years, and we just got in at the right moment. But yeah, you're right. Like Gorkcore is just like crazy. It reminds me almost of like when models started wearing Deftones t-shirts and Slayer
Yeah.
t-shirts, and you're like, name one Slayer song.
Yeah. Where were you when I was a teenager wearing this stuff? And
Exactly.
it was nothing cool about it, and now it's in fashion. It
Yeah.
is wild, like how things are changing. And like as I say, I started my love of outdoors. My gateway drug was climbing. I used to climb loads, and hiking was an extension of that. You had to hike to get to some of the good climbs, and they weren't. You'd celebrate when there was some good climbing by a road, but often that's not the case. Particularly in Wales or the Lake District, you had to put your bag on, you had to put your kit in, you had to carry 20 kilos worth of climbing gear, more than you often needed, but you took it up anyway because it was gear, and everyone wanted to carry their gear around.
Yeah.
And and you just sort of found, I found walking through that, it was a means to an end at that point, for me. But and I think it was for a lot of younger people who did climbing and other such things as well, like even mountain biking, I think is one of those sports where there's a bit of not mountain bike, yeah, mountain biking, where there's a bit of walking involved as well. So I think a lot of people, it's a means to an end. But I think through doing it, you find like that actually you enjoy the walking in itself, and then it just becomes something that you want to do without the climbing attached to it. And that was my kind of gateway to it. But yeah, I'm super excited in the direction that I see the outdoor industry, and say the industry, that makes it sound like it's more about the companies who do it. So the outdoor community
Yeah.
go, I think it's going in a really, really exciting direction. I think that there's so much diversity growing into that space at the moment. And yeah, I just love how many people from all different backgrounds are just going, you know what, I don't want to go drink on a Friday night. I want to go camp on a mountain somewhere and maybe take my drinks with me, but I want to go camp on a mountain somewhere and just have a completely kind of different and wholesome experience to what young people, would do when I was younger. And that's, for me, is like super exciting.
Yeah. It does definitely come with its challenges, though. Like as you said there, like people do use that as an excuse to, bring a slab of cans out into the wild, and
Mm.
then you have like the litter and all that kind of stuff, and that is the bad side of it. But you're kind of almost being a little bit relaxed in that kind of stuff, where you're like, well, hopefully you'll start to see like what you're doing, and that like this is actually a positive experience where you're spending more time outdoors, and you will not do that anymore. um but on the whole, it is, I suppose, shining a torch on the outdoors community, and the luxuries that we, as especially in where we are in the world as well, that we have with the outdoors right at our footstep. Like look at you guys in the UK, like you have the absolutely stunning national parks that are there, the Peak District, the Lake District. In Wales you've Snowdonia, you've got the Brecon Beacons, you've got Exmoor, Dartmoor, and then up into Scotland, just like absolutely stunning landscapes. Um and over here as well, we do have like the luxury of these things being right at our doorstep. But people haven't really noticed them before, and now it's finally getting a torch shone on them, to show you that you can go out and do these things. They're alternative experiences. You don't need to spend hundreds of pounds on a Saturday night. You can get a, I don't know, what are that brand, you just get a meal in a bag, and sit in your tent and
Yeah.
a sip of whiskey, and you're going to have just as much of a good time as a few pints.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So we dove right in. We're already 15
We
minutes.
did. We got stuck in there 15 minutes later.
Yeah, yeah. So do you want to tell our audience who you are, what you do?
Yeah, of course. So where do I start? So I'm Matthew, and I am also a podcaster. Although you're more than a podcaster, I'm just a podcaster. But I'm a marketeer and a podcaster by trade, I guess. I'm also a huge advocate for getting outdoors and just experiencing nature in your own way. in particular trails. So I run a podcast, if you don't mind me plugging it straight away.
Really, that's why you're
Cool.
here.
Okay, I run a podcast called Humans of the Trail, recently rebranded from the Distance Hiker podcast, if that sounds familiar. And what it and I am really about is just sharing stories of ordinary people on the trail. And it doesn't have to be long distance hiking in particular. I have an interest in just all trail users, whether that's runners, walkers, people in who struggle with mobility, so wheelchair users, cyclists, anything really goes. I think that access to trails is probably one of the most important things that a society can have access to, amongst other kind of things like healthcare and access to water, clean water and food and things. But I think trails are such an underrated resource for us. And there's projects like Slowways that really highlight that as well, which I think are really worth looking at. And the reason that these projects are cropping up and that I'm doing what I'm doing is because I feel that as a society, if we had better access to trails, and we do have good access to trails in the UK, but also globally, we would have a happier and healthier society. Because, by getting people outside and getting them outdoors and engaged in nature, what happens is they start to take ownership and pride in their natural spaces, but also their health, and they go hand in hand with each other. And I think that then means that people start really wanting to think about how can I conserve and protect my local area. And if you really start to love something and really start to connect with that area, that intensifies, that deepens, and you get to know your local community, and you get to be involved in a wholly different way to what you would have if you hadn't actually go out on the trail in the first place. So I think it's just a catalyst to change with a lot of people. It has been for me, and it has been for a lot of people in the hiking community. So that's kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So yeah, my first kind of thing I do is podcasting. I have this podcast to talk to loads of amazing folks who kind of get out walking. And then I'm a trail user myself. And I'm not a long distance hiker. I did run a long distance hiking podcast, and I realized that with two kids and a full time job and running a podcast and other such commitments around that, I just didn't have the opportunity anymore to do long distance hiking. I have done in the past, but not at the moment. And I thought, well, I'm going to make a podcast around just the trails, which is why I rebranded quite recently from Distance Hiker to Humans of the Trail. And I couldn't be happier with the result of it, because I feel I have a podcast and a brand that is authentically aligned with me and what I'm interested in. And it feels completely right, and the feedback's been great so far. So yeah, and I love running. I love doing a bit of walking. Running is my go-to at the moment because it fits in so nicely with having kids. Um, you can get a lot more distance running than you can going for a walk. It hurt for a little bit, but it hurts less now, and I just find it fantastic. I love jumping into cold water, which wild swimming as it's called now, which is getting as many haters as it is lovers.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that's me in a nutshell. And by day, I work for a major outdoor company in marketing, and then I do the podcast and everything in the evenings, fitting around everything else, really. So not particularly great at talking about myself, but there we go.
Oh no, well, like I'm the exact same, but I think we're two peas in a pod here. Both marketeers working in the outdoors industry and love trails
Yeah,
and running as well. And maybe we'll poke holes in or poke into the running and trail running type stuff as well.
sounds
Uh,
good.
but so in terms of hiking, have you done? I'm sure you've done a lot of hiking. Have you done any distance trails, any long distance trails?
Yeah. So my experience of long distance hiking is actually abroad. Um,
Okay.
so I fell into this in a really funny way. So when I was at university, so over 10 years ago now, a bit further, I guess, I went away on an experience with a charity who kind of focuses on, I say inverted commas, which you can't see, international development, which is a load of BS. It was just a bunch of rich kids. I was not one of them, who went away on basically a trip to do a bunch of things like, build toilets where there were no toilets, in poor communities, and conservation things like turtle conservation on the beach. It was an amazing experience for 22-year-old me at the time. And I also had the opportunity to do my first long distance hike. Now, the name of the hike evades me. It is an established long distance hike, but I've done some research and I cannot work out what it is. But basically, it was in Nicaragua, and it stretched from two volcanoes in Nicaragua, and I think it was about 190 kilometers over about 2 weeks. And we carried about 20 kilos of kit. There was no lightweight hiking kit provided. We had kind of heavy bags that were by themselves about 2 kilos, trangiers, big tents that you had to kind of spread over the whole group. All of our food, which mainly consisted of pork and beans. And it was hot and it was hard, and I loved it. And I then did it again when I went back with the charity on a work basis in a couple of years later, and we did another trek in India through Kerala. And so those are my two experiences long distance hiking, and I loved them. I just held on to them so tightly as these two life changing moments for me, where I learnt a heck of a lot about myself, and I realized that I love sleeping in the dirt and I love carrying big weights on my back, although I don't anymore because I get lightweight kits and all that. And they completely changed me. But when I got back to the UK, I didn't even know at the time that there was such a thing as long distance trails. So I never carried it on. I just went straight back to my love of climbing. And it was actually working then by chance with a company who does long distance hiking holidays that I started to realize there was a thing called long distance hiking. However, I went the other way and started doing a bit of long distance bike touring. So the Way of the Roses was one of them, and the Pennine Bridleway was another one I did. But I still love climbing more than anything, so I just did loads of climbing. But when I left that particular business, I guess I'd say a slightly entrepreneurial kind of brain, but I'm also not very good at making money. But I wanted to start something else for myself. So I started a walking holiday company in the long distance hiking niche, and I loved it. Like, I used to arrange people's walking holidays. It was the weirdest kind of transition into this. And through that, I kind of snaked my way through into this long distance hiking community. Um, so yeah, back to your question, I don't have a great deal of experience long distance hiking, but I do have a lot of experience getting out, doing a lot of walking, a lot of climbing, a lot of being outside, and I can define myself as somebody who just spends a lot of time in nature, and is quite happy to walk big distances with a bag on my back if I want to, and I feel massively fortunate to be able to do so.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny. Like I've very little long distance hiking experience myself. Considering that HiiKER originally was a long distance hiking app specifically built for long distance hiking
Mm.
planning, navigation, and all that kind of stuff. And my first long distance experience was in abroad as well. I went to Yosemite and I did a 4 or 5 day trek around Yosemite National Park. Amazing experience, absolutely, like almost life-changing experience. And then I did a couple of trails. I think I did the South Downs Way in the
Yep.
UK. I've done the Wicklow Way here in Ireland, and a couple of other like smaller long distance, like couple of days, 3 or 4 day kind of trips. But like, considering like the conversations that I've had, I'm sure, and you've had these same conversations with people that have spent months, literally
Yeah.
months. In some cases, I spoke to Andrew Terrell. I don't know if you.
His podcast's coming out 2 or 3 weeks time on mine, so yeah, I've spoken to him now.
Have you read his book? Well, his books. He's got
Yeah, I finished his first book, but not his second. But yeah, it's remarkable, isn't it?
his story is absolutely incredible. So he spent like 18 months walking from the tip of the boot of Italy right up to the Arctic Circle in Norway. All conditions and just non-stop. I think he maybe had like 1 or 2 breaks, uh, or a handful of breaks where he stayed in a hotel, but like kind of have to give it to him like at that point. And then other people that are walking around the planet, walking from had a French guy, his name escapes me right now, that is walking from Paris. He's still doing this. Like I spoke to him 18 months ago, and he's still walking
Still
right
going.
now, and he's going through Australia now, I believe.
Right.
You then to go on to the United States and do the PCT as part of this round the
Mad.
world trip. But yeah, sorry. Like my point is
I'll steal that guest from you. I'm going to find out who that is. That sounds like a good one.
really interesting, really friendly guy as well. but my point being is that, you can involve yourselves in these communities, support them as you have as well, and you can know so much about them just because you're speaking to so many people that's in it.
Mm.
You can be I'm a father myself. My daughter is a bit older now, and she actually did the South Downs way with me reluctantly. Uh, she'll probably say very reluctantly. But you can still kind of live within these communities, and you can support those communities as well.
I think that's an important thing to mention as well, because for a long time, especially when I started the Facebook group, which is probably an important thing to add, is I kind of admin very passively now a Facebook group around long distance hiking. And when I set that up and really started diving into this, I felt like such an imposter. I was like, well, who am I to be a part of this community if I don't have time to really do the things which, the community does? And I think there was some fairness in that in some ways, because actually, I would have been, maybe not. It would have been lovely to be able to do more of that, and I want to, but at the same time, I'm somebody, I know I'm going to go and hike long distance trails at some point in the
Yeah,
future and do a lot more of it. The reality for me right now is the passion is there, but the time is not. I have two kids, and what I don't want to do is miss my kids. It's hugely important to me because I've made a conscious choice to be a father, that I actually live up to that and I spend the time being a father. However, there is a balance to capture between being a dad and also having some time to myself. So that's where going out on the weekends comes into its own, or even taking my kids out on shorter trails, sorry, with me. But imposter syndrome is real, and I for sure felt it big time. And I would say that imposter syndrome was one of the reasons I've also rebranded to a point, because I thought, well, actually, I want something that embodies where I'm at now as well,
mm,
rather than where I kind of where I wish I could be, which is doing more trails. Um, excuse me. So yeah, I at some point will be this long distance hiker. I imagine I will be, but I'm also at peace that that's probably not going to happen for another 10 years or so, until my kids are, you know, not interested in spending any time with me whatsoever when they're teenagers. But that is not now. So I will quite happily wait and enjoy the littleness of the two children, 7 and 4, that I have at the moment, while they're still interested in, you know, playing with me and putting Legos together and things like that.
yeah. I'm certainly in the teenage bracket now. She has zero time for me. But I'm hoping that I planted the seed a little bit early, and then she'll go through her teenage years and be like, "Hey, you like hiking and spending time in the outdoors? Can you teach me a thing or two?" So hopefully, it'll come back to that.
Yeah,
But
I'm sure it will.
until then, though, like you're spending a bit of time out running. So, are you trail running? Do you spend out on the trail,
Yeah.
road?
So my journey into running started last year, and it was very sporadic last year, when I actually, John Beamson from Robust Tours, because he did a
Yes, yes.
collaboration, or rest in peace Robust Tours, because they're now closed. Attended two of his events, and his first event was the 50-kilometer kind of ultra marathon. It was it's a walking ultra, basically, almost like the active challenge ones. For people listening, that might kind of draw a distinction as to what they were like, with a slightly eerie edge to them. And I did the 50-kilometer one because I never actually walked 50 kilometers in a day. It's not all that far, like for a lot of people, especially seasoned ultra runners. It's about 30 miles or so. But I did it and it hurt like crazy. And I thought, oh, okay, that was manageable. It took me a few days to recover afterwards. So then I signed up to his, I think it was 70-kilometer one, later on that year in October. And I did that again as well. With the 70-kilometer one, I did a bit of running in between parts of it, mostly when no one was watching. And I felt all right. I did that in a respectable time. Don't ask me the time because I can't remember, but I was quite pleased with it at the time. And I trained for it by running, because I just didn't have the time to do long walks, to train for a long walk. So I was like, right, I'm just going to get strong calf muscles and, just run and stretch and get through it that way. And it was after doing those, I was like, actually, I quite enjoy the running side of this more than the walking at the moment. I enjoy the fact that you can go out on the trail, you can do an hour, and feel like you've had a really good workout, be out of breath, and get fitter and stronger, and feel that fitness and strength, and also that mental resilience kind of coming to you almost with every run.
Mm.
Um, and come 2023 this year, I committed to just getting out more. And I just realized that I'm making excuses every time I go, I can't bother to go for a run. I'd had some running gear by the door, had some shoes by the door, and I just got out and went running. And it started with weekly check-ins at park run. So I thought, right, if I'm going to run, I'm going to have like a check-in at a park run. So I've done a few now this year, which has been pretty good. And I also then started just going out in the evenings doing the trails and just going a bit further and further and further. And I'm not running huge distances. It's sort of 10 to 15 kilometers. But I absolutely love it. And, my plan is to continue just to enjoy running this year without a competitive spirit to it, but see how far I can push myself. Because I know if I can walk 70 kilometers, I would imagine in a couple of months, 6 months' time, I can probably run, a half marathon, a full marathon, or compete in a casual, non-competitive ultra or something like that. So I love it. Like it's new to me, very new to me. I went and bought one of these fancy race vests because I saw everybody use them, and I thought that looks good. I want to carry my water with me when I'm doing this, like something slightly longer than 5 kilometers, and I feel I actually need a drink. And I think it's a absolutely amazing way of spending a couple of hours that fits in so nicely with family life. It's such an accessible way to get fit. It makes you feel amazing afterwards, and you feel really badass when you're running down the hill past all the walkers and everything. Because I always see people running past when I'm walking. I'm like, that looks way much more fun than what I'm doing. And yeah, I'm totally for it. I think it's if you can run, then it's a fantastic way to spend some time. And I walk up the hills as well, and I just run down the hills and I run on the flats, and it kind of eliminates that feeling of I should be really fit enough to run up the hills. I'm like, I'm not fit enough to sprint up these hills. I'm just going to enjoy walking up them and then recover on the way down.
Yeah, well, like we're not Kylian Jornet. We're not, none of these like ultra athletes. We're just trying to spend as much quality time in the outdoors as you can.
Yeah,
I've been running quite a bit lately. Well, for the last couple of years, I've definitely
you've been
thrown.
crushing. You've been on the ultras, haven't you? You've
Yeah,
been smashing it.
I have because I'm maybe I'm a little bit too competitive for my own nature. I'll just throw my towel in and say I'm going for it. I will, and I kind of bite off a little bit too much more than I can chew. But it's really is enjoyable, especially the days where you aren't set to a particular time. You're not set to a particular distance. You're just out and you want to go out and just enjoy your local national park or your local trails. But like as you said, it ties in so well with family life because you might say, I'd love to actually get out and go 15 kilometers today on trails. But to do that with a family
Yeah,
means 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours
yeah,
of time that you could be spending with them. Whereas if you're doing it over two, you can get up, get it done as well. And like this whole like tick box mentality. But like you get out there early, you're beating a lot of the walkers. You're getting the sunrise. You're getting like the early starts, and you're getting that nice cup of coffee at the end. Nice little reward.
totally.
So you're still it's hiking but faster. That's usually how I see
Yeah,
it. It's just and if you're getting into the ultra stuff, then it's just a nice long day in the mountains. That's my best way of looking at it. Like you're not out trying to win anything. Although sometimes I do have that in my head. I just get it in my head like maybe I'll win, even though I've got Kylian Jornet in the same race as me. There's absolutely no chance in hell that I'm going to be able to win it. But it's the two of them kind of they cross over nicely. However, running up hills is not fun.
no, I running up hills is the thing I don't like. But what really struck me about running, and bear in mind, I was somebody who thought running was stupid. 6 months ago, really, I thought running's really boring. Why do I want to run? And I like doing things that are more interesting and more skilled than running. And I really had this prejudice around it. And the more I do it, the more I realize there is a skill to it. It's actually not all that boring. The thing is, it just hurts when you kind of, it just hurts all the time. It's not a one of those sports you do at any point where it feels amazing. There's always an underlying level of, oh, this is sore. But what I really like is that type 2 fun is you go, once you finish and you get to the car, you're sad it's over, and you're also happy it's over at the same time. And it feels so rewarding. Like, it feels so good knowing that you look at your tracker, if you are tracking anything, and you see you've done, a good amount of mileage. You then think, God, that would have taken me ages if I walked it. And you just feel genuinely impressed with your ability to do that. And then you can see, especially at the point I'm at, which is very much beginner running, you can see the gains very quickly, which is like keeps you massively psyched for it. And that's what I used to find when I started climbing, is I used to really enjoy seeing those gains kind of occur really quickly.
Mm.
I'm a very kind of busy, quite hyperactive person, and I love a good endorphin rush. So being able to go, oh, I'm like better than last week, for me is a huge reward. So yeah, I'm a massive advocate for it, and I think I'm not going to be slowing down anytime soon, because it just fits in so nicely with everything at the moment for me.
And I think it is quite a good gateway for a lot of people to get into the outdoors as well, because like running is running obviously running in trails is very different to running on road in terms of like technicalities and like the strength and stuff that you need, but it's much more translatable, I think, than a lot of other sports. So like mountain biking, it's not, it's expensive to get into that, whereas trail running,
Yes.
yes, there is, you have to get the right runners, you have to get possibly a race vest, but once you have the access to the outdoors, it's and you have some knowledge of routes, little hiker plug there, but you're able to access it. You're there for you to get out to, and the same with hiking as well. Hiking. I think hiking is a little bit different in that, like, it still has that old kind of nature to it, where hiking is for people that mountaineers. That's what that's for.
Yes.
Whereas trail running, I feel that is kind of it. There's a crossover, a really strong crossover between road running and with trail running, and both communities kind of cross over. Like, a lot of running clubs will have people that runners that run both on trails and on track and on road and on cross country and all that kind of stuff. So I think there is a nice gateway, and that's something that you advocate quite a lot for, is getting more people from more diverse backgrounds, all sorts of backgrounds, getting them into the outdoors. So I think it's a good gateway for people to get in.
Yeah, and that's an interesting segue, actually, because from one of the, I'm a white dude who has all the privilege in the world to be able to do these things. And I didn't come from a rich family, but I came from a wealthy enough family, working middle class. Or my dad was a police officer, my mum worked as a teaching assistant, and we had enough resources to be able to enjoy a couple of holidays a year, and for my parents to retire comfortably, and for them to enjoy retirement at around 50, and to do all the things they love doing. And for us to have like an experience of going on 2 skiing holidays or something. So, we weren't poor, but we also had those lovely experiences. And so my partner, she won't mind me saying this, she is the total opposite. She grew up in a poor part of South Wales in Newport. She was, sorry, originally moved over from Yemen, and she had an upbringing completely different to mine. She hadn't really experienced the outdoors and getting outside and anything to do with nature until she moved off to university, left university, and then when she was kind of working and moved into her own house some years later, she joined a mountaineering club, which is actually where we met, and had her first exposure walking up Triffin. And she was doing it in like, cotton clothing, and got completely drenched through, and loved the experience. And it blew my mind when I first met her, and I was like, "You never went outside as a child. So you were not allowed to go kind of walking and hiking and doing all the things which I was allowed to do." And she, even now, you can see the reservations of her wanting to go outside and walk on her own, because it's so foreign to her that she'll quite comfortably go out with me, but it just seems completely alien to her to go and just wild camp in the middle of a woods in the middle of the night. She's like, why would I go camp in the middle of the woods at night? I've got a comfortable bed here. It's dangerous doing that, because that's her experience. It would have been, in the past for her to do that where she had access to do it, which wasn't the kind of place you'd want to. Um, so, you know, as a family who's raising two mixed race children, I feel I have a responsibility to advocate for that as an ally for, you know, for individuals and groups of people who cannot get out and do those things. And it's frustrating to me. Well, it's not frustrating, but I feel like I can't ever fully understand what it's like to not have grown up with that access, but at least I have some level of appreciation for it based on my close experiences, which is my partner and my children and her family as well. And I feel with that experience, I want to be as good as ally as I can for anybody who hasn't had that experience in their life. So yeah, it's a massively important thing for me, kind of talking about the diversity thing. But it's also, even for me, with somebody who has a good level of understanding for it, a really difficult subject to approach. It's difficult to talk about. I think people get scared of getting the language wrong as well, which is okay. And you know, sometimes it's hard to know where to even start with it, and even to see the problems that are in front of you. So, yeah, I think I'm really glad you raised that, and I'm glad I've had a chance to talk about it. And one thing I do try to do in my podcast is try and get a range of different voices on, which I know you do as well, because what I don't want it to be is just me talking about, you know, hiking and walking from my perspective.
Yeah, yeah, and it is the kind of the nature of, I suppose, that old fashioned view of hiking and the outdoors, especially in traditional kind of white, Western civilizations, or societies like the UK, like Ireland, like North America. Look at the through hiking community in North America, like the um, the no, the I suppose the participation of non-white through hikers and non-cis white through hikers is staggeringly low, like extremely, extremely low. In fact, Cal Dobbs, who I had on my podcast, was the first triple crowner, transgender triple crowner. Which to me, like, it's a massive feat for anyone to get a triple crown to hike all three of those trails, but so many people have done it that you would think that there would be more than one person, and you probably would have thought that more than one person would have done it years ago. And even with black it was Dragonfly, Dragon
Mm.
Scott. She was the second black female triple crowner, and there's only been a small handful of non-white triple crowners or people who've completed these trails. So it's just, especially in a country that is as diverse as the United States, to see such little participation in those, and like we can talk all day about where they come from, but again, like, we are two white dudes, that we don't want to to talk about it too much, because we might get the language wrong, but it is fair
Yeah.
enough for us to point out the large anomalies in these situations where you're like, why is it that bad? Why is it being let to get that bad? But it is also at the same time amazing to see groups that are forming, communities that are
Yeah.
forming across these countries. Like in the UK, you've got Muslim hikers, like you've got the Wanderlust Women. You've got the Black Hikers group in the United States as well, and there's many, many more that are around the world that are doing very, very similar things. But it's that representation. You need to see it. You need to see yourself in those situations, in those communities, before you can actually get out there. To be a pioneer, to be the first person to do that, takes a huge amount of courage. Even though, like, everybody says the outdoor community, the hiking community, it's such a welcoming community, in a lot of cases it's not. In a lot of cases it's not. Like, some places, some towns, some people, some hiking, hill walking clubs, the people that are there, they're not all very welcoming to everybody. Would love to think that they are, but people, just aren't
Yeah.
always friendly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You know, it's a common complaint, I guess, that you see of, um, people from individuals from diverse minority backgrounds coming on the news, for instance, with a BBC article, where you'll see a lot of comments at the bottom saying, this is nonsense. Everybody has access to hiking in the outdoors. The outdoors is for all. How can the outdoors discriminate? Blah, blah, blah. And to a point, of course, like the vast majority of the outdoor community, the vast majority of the outdoor community are so welcoming and happy to embrace anybody within their space. And it's not even their space, within the outdoor spaces. And yet it can be ruined. Like somebody's experience in the outdoors can be ruined by such a small minority of people who are not willing to accept them in that space, whether that's a local pub owner who doesn't, we've had this experience, who's cross with you for using the toilet, yet, and that was when I went in to I won't go into it, but basically I've had an experience where, me and a couple of, white friends were walking out at the same time, went into a pub, and then to use the toilet, and then, my partner and somebody else who was also brown as well went into use the toilet. Funnily enough, they were the ones who got kind of shouted at by the pub owner. That was one example. Yes, it could have been something else that annoyed him, the fact there was two groups of people using the toilet, but that was just one example. And I've got more examples like that where I've seen the experience of somebody who's brown in the outdoors being very different from the experience of somebody who's white. And I think that there is a lot of work to do still, and yet I also see how far that's coming as well. So I'm really excited by seeing how many outdoor groups there are on Instagram alone for people from diverse, underrepresented backgrounds to just get out and do hiking together in a place that feels like containing and safe for them to do that, because it's just them doing that together. And I think that's the most wonderful thing. And the more of those groups that can be set up, especially where it's like geographical groups. So, for instance, there could be a group. What's the group called? Is it like there's a group which is just for gay hikers, and I can't remember what it's called. But take that group model. Like if you had that group which are kind of regional areas, that'd be amazing. And I think there's so much more work to do within those communities and those spaces. And I think that we'll see in the next 5 years the outdoor landscape completely transform with a lot more representation within it. And that's my hope, because actually I love seeing more representation when I go out hiking. I love it when I see faces on the hill that you would ordinarily see on the hill. I think it's just the most wonderful thing, because it just feels that's just life, that's reality. We live on planet Earth with a whole bunch of different people of all different, skin colors and accents and viewpoints even. And I just love it when you see those people out on the hills, and it becomes a melting pot of humanity, and that's just wonderful. So I'm all for it. I'm really excited about where things are going in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, I suppose, keep doing what you're doing as well by using your platform as a way to elevate these communities and to elevate these voices. But it's also great to see that like they are becoming like these communities are becoming the platform as well. That
Yes,
it's not,
they're driving the change.
exactly. It's not podcasts like ours that are driving the change. Like
No.
we're doing what we can, but it's their communities that are actually driving the change themselves, which is just amazing. Like um seeing Wanderless Women like getting sponsored by North Face and Blacks, and then Haroon getting sponsored by a bunch of
Merrill?
different.
No. I know We Go Outside too, which is another black trail running club. They've been sponsored by Merrill, which is great.
Oh
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Muslim Hikers has been, they've been sponsored by somebody. I can't remember who.
They got a Strava sponsorship at one
Strava.
point.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Yeah. But there's so many more. There's so many more. Merrill is sponsoring the Unlikely Hikers. They had over in the States where they had like their specialized boot, which is like awesome. There's just so many cool things that are going on right now, and some people might say, like, again, from that side of the fence where they're like, oh, you're just doing, it's politics, so you're doing this for reasons of politics. It's like, well, no, this is a sign of the change that representation has to be seen, and these companies are helping with that change, and the change is being driven by the communities, which is just it's fantastic.
It's grassroots change that brands are realizing that you either jump on the back of it and support it because that's what the community wants, or you miss an amazing opportunity to support something that's going to really change the outdoor landscape. And I think a lot of brands are realizing that it's so worth jumping on the back of and supporting this, because the benefit of that long term is just immeasurable.
Absolutely. We don't have a huge amount of time left, but I do want to ask you, as a one podcaster to another podcaster, who has been your favorite guest?
That's a really good question. Really good question. Okay, so I'm going to go with who sprung to mind first. And I would say Rebecca Dawson, who is Rebecca the Rambler, probably my favorite guest. Or I'm going to say one of my favorite guests, because I've had some amazing guests on the show.
Yeah.
But Rebecca comes to mind first. She was just fantastic. She's the chair lady of the Ramblers Association. And she is also a part of Everybody Outdoors, which is a hiking community for plus size hikers. And I think she's fantastic. Another guest as well who I would say was great was Chris Howard, who did you have him on yours? Yeah. Chris the Ghost Walker. I love Chris, and I'm super excited that he's soon going to be doing a marathon in every national park in the UK. So hopefully I'm going to record another podcast with him, fingers crossed, when he's actually out on the trail running those marathons. But yeah, Chris was fantastic as well. But yeah, Rebecca and Chris were probably my two favorites.
Yeah, it's hard to pick. It's really, really hard to pick.
Really difficult to pick, because I very rarely have a podcast. In fact, I don't think I've ever had a podcast where I've walked away from it going, that was awful. I have amazing guests on my podcast. So yeah, really, really challenging to pick with them. But those two really stand out for me.
Yeah. I'm definitely going to have to get some notes off you on podcasting, and how you're asking questions and stuff like that, because I think there's a lot we can learn from each other.
Totally.
I certainly think I can learn more from you, to be honest.
I don't know.
Just click record and we go.
Yeah, a bit like that. You'll be surprised.
Well, Matthew, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Finally, after all this time, as we said, it's been 18 months.
What took you so long, right? You episode 2 or 3 with me, and we're episode 50 with you, and I'm finally on the show. No, I'm joking. It's all good. It's been a pleasure to join you.
Oh yeah, look, we'll catch up again soon on the podcast. Hopefully, have you on again, and maybe we'll see each other out on the trail very soon.
I'm sure we will. All right. Cheers, Eoin.
Cheers, Matthew. Thank you so much for tuning in to the HiiKER podcast. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Matthew Usherwood. As I said, you can check out his podcast. You can check out the episode that I was on. Maybe not that one, but you can check out all the fantastic interviews that he has on his podcast on Humans of the Trail. Just Google Humans of the Trail and you will find his podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back very soon again with another interview, another topic, and until then, happy trails.